Thank you. So this afternoon we'll start just with the lineage prayer on page 1. Zhen loi gom ji gang ba zom ba zhen sen or gon loi zhen zhen me ba dang zhen de ran da dan zhe be gom zhen la nian go re zhen ba me ba Good afternoon. This morning we looked at the generation stage and went through most of what I think we need to cover, just one little bit left. To review, before we finish this section, first of all, the generation stage corresponds to each part of it to 4 things: an attribute of the ground, Buddha nature, which is the ground of purification, a specific type or stage of delusion, which is what is to be purified. So the experience of death, the bardo, gestation, birth, growing up, education, learning, all of these things have things to represent them. We haven't gone through all of them yet. And finally, death and arising in the bardo. They also correspond to aspects of the completion stage. And finally, they correspond to the attributes, activity, and attainment of Buddhahood. Now, another thing about the generation stage that is not that, well, we have to talk about it because everyone talks about it when they teach this stuff, is the notion of the 4 types of birth. The 4 types of birth are womb birth, where, like us, like mammals, egg birth, like most everything else, instantaneous birth, which is what happens in some realms, like some God realms and hell realms and things like that, where there are apparently no genetic precursors. And then heat and moisture birth, which I, for a long time, thought was just nonsense. But Lama Tratok was teaching about it during one of the stages of the Path weekends, and somebody pointed out, I don't remember if it was Travis or who it was, somebody who knew more about things than I do, that it may be a valid description of bacterial propagation. And so then there's, I know it's more complicated than that. I mean, I went back home and I questioned the resident biologist about these things and got, kingdoms and phylae and all this kind of stuff, and I can't remember it. So, but basically, there are 4 types of way you can be born according to Buddhism, and there are slightly different forms of the generation stage to purify each of these. Now, this sounds odd because obviously everybody practicing the generation stage is a human being who was born somehow from a womb. As far, lizards and insects and birds don't practice it. Fish don't. Bacteria don't. And maybe gods do, I don't know. But it doesn't mean that you're just trying to purify your own most recent birth. You're trying to purify the habits of every possible type of birth. And as is well known in Mahayana Buddhism, we believe that everybody has been everything and done everything except achieve Buddhahood. But everything that you can imagine, every terrible thing that anybody else does, you've done at some point. And every wonderful thing that everybody else does that you feel incapable of doing, you've probably done too. So I'll explain the specific techniques that correspond to the 4 types of birth. And I will give practical examples of 3, maybe 3.5 of them, because it's always, there are 4, so they're going to be about 6. You just got to learn to live with it, The 4 sadhanas of the Vijayadhara Guru, there's 7 of them. The 4 Ayusadhanas, long life practices, there are 6. But it's the 4. There's a good reason for calling it the 4. I mean, there is. It really is the 4. But one of them's the combined one, and then, you know. So, the most complicated, and then they reverse it. Sometimes they'll say that the egg birth, which they call double birth, because you emerge from, I mean, it varies with different species, but typically you emerge from your mother, and then you emerge from the egg casing. So in that case, the type of visualization that corresponds to that is called causal and resultant Vajra holder. So I'll describe how this happens. So you, in the center of the mandala, there will be a string or a garland of, I think it's the vowels, white. And those become a moon disk, marked by the vowels. And that's called awakening in mirror-like wisdom. So you're transforming the genetic aspect from the father into a mirror-like wisdom, or perception of it. And it's also connected with the 32 marks on the body of a Buddha. Then above it will appear a double string of the consonants, so it forms 80 and not 40. And that's right, 16 vowels, so it's double string of vowels and double string of consonants. And then they will become a sun, marked with those consonants. And that is the second awakening in the sun, which is the wisdom of equality. And the purpose of that is to purify your perception, I would say, of the genetic content from your mother. Then in between the two will appear the seed syllable of the deity. And that's the third awakening in the syllable, which is the wisdom of discernment. Then what will happen is the sun and the moon and the seed syllable will all form a globule or a sphere of light. Now, in some cases, the seed syllable will change into a scepter first, and in some cases, whether it does or not, there will be the emission and withdrawal of light rays. But anyway, the fourth stage, the fourth awakening, is awakening as the globe or globule or sphere, which is the wisdom of accomplishment. And that purifies the actual conception when the genetic material and your consciousness, your wind-mind, mix together. Then that will arise as the complete form of the deity. And that is awakening as the body of the deity, which is the wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu. And that transforms the experience of birth. Now, in the case of egg birth, it's going to go on. The deity, the male and female deities, will emanate the entourage. Usually they'll enter into union, the entourage will emerge from them, and either in the form of light rays or seed syllables or amrita, and take their places. And the entourage can be, again, produced from seed syllables and scepters or just instantaneous. Then, the central deity in that case is called the causal Vajra holder. Then, through the bliss of producing the entourage, the principal male and female will melt into light and become again a sphere of light that they describe as like mercury, but it doesn't mean silver. It means more like white light with a pink gleam. At that point, 4 members of the entourage, who represent the 4 immeasurables, will ask the principal deities to re-arise out of love, compassion, joy, and impartiality towards sentient beings. And they'll sing, usually there's a stanza to each, so it takes some time to chant. Then at that point, the sphere will withdraw inward, again become the syllable or seed syllables. Sometimes the father and mother have separate ones, which turn into the scepters, and then they'll arise, and that's the resultant Vajra holder. And then it continues from there with the invitation of the wisdom deities, which represents learning the skill of your family, the traditional skill of your family, and then the sealing with the lord of the family after empowerment, which is receiving your inheritance from your parents, and so on. Now, the correspondence of here with egg birth is the dual generation of the deity. The initial arising of the deity through fivefold manifest awakening as the causal Vajra holder is like the egg emerging from the mother, and then the dissolving of it, and then re-arising again as the deity in response to the 4 immeasurables is like the baby chicken or whatever it is emerging from the eggshell. The second type of birth is womb birth, where when you emerge from the womb, you're still attached to the placenta and so on, but you don't have a shell around you. And that is exactly the same up to and including the fivefold manifest awakening. But in that case, after emanating the entourage, they go straight on to receiving the wisdom deities, dissolving into them the empowerments, offerings, praises, mantra, and so on. So it's a little shorter because there's one less step, or 2 less steps, you could say, in the birth process. And then the third type of generation is when it is birth from heat and moisture, like a bacterium, in which case there will be the seed syllable, and it will just turn into the deity, very, very simply. And then the fourth one, what corresponds to instantaneous birth, is generation of the deity complete in an instant of recollection. That is sometimes done because the practice is considered of a certain type, and is sometimes done just for the sake of convenience. Now, the thing you need to understand, though, is this does not mean that you need to practice all 4 types of generation stage. Any one will do it, because you can pack in the same symbolism into even the most simple form of generation. As long as there's a lotus, a sun, a moon, a syllable, and a resultant deity, there is enough on a sort of semi-conscious level of imagery to purify your perception of all of it. And so, yeah, that was the last bit of information. The next thing that we need to address is that the role of mantra. And the role of mantra is more complex than it may seem, because mantra has a role in the generation stage, but it also has a role in the completion stage. And that's why it's important to, that's why randomly I decided to put it in between the 2. So, So we often use the term mantra simply to mean words, typically Sanskrit, but not always, that we repeat a lot. And these words are, there are several types, but we can basically categorize them as having two functions. One is to immerse us in the deity through the faculty of speech. And the other is to perform a specific function. So, for example, when we do these, I'll return to the first because it's more central, but we'll deal with the second first. We do this when we do many of our yearly practices. We'll have mantras of pacification, which will typically have the word shanti or shantim based on the, what do you call that? We don't do it in English, you don't do it in Tibetan, but you do it in Latin and Greek. Declension, based on the declension, or the case. Mantras of increase, which will usually have the word pushtim, of attraction, vasham, and of force, mara. So those are things where you're trying to pacify your own wrongdoing, your own veils, sickness, other natural disasters that affect others, and so on. Increase the amount of food and wealth that is available in the world. Attract people to the path, and annihilate, finally, through force, your own ignorance. We cannot annihilate others' ignorance. If we could annihilate others' ignorance, the Buddha would have done it. So the fact that we're here proves that it can't do it. But we can annihilate our own ignorance if we're willing to. But the other type of function that mantra performs is to immerse us in the deity. Now, one way you can put it is to say that the mantra is the deity's speech, and thereby, by repeating the deity's speech with our speech, we bring ourselves into alignment with the deity. Actually, in the Vajrayana tradition, as Jangalo Drutai describes it, in the beginning of several places, but for example, the beginning of the stages of the path that we've been studying, it's not really going far enough to say the mantra is the deity's speech. The mantra is the deity. We tend to think of the deity as a physical appearance: 3 faces, 6 arms, 4 legs, wings. That's just Vajrakila, for example. And but that's the appearance of the deity. It's not made up. It's not symbolic, just symbolic. It's something else. But it's one aspect. The mantra is equally the deity. Now, this is important because one of the obstacles that foreigners, I'll say foreigners, by which, Westerners is the term that we used to use, but it's been pointed out that the term Westerner is actually racist because it basically means Europeans, people of European extraction, so it excludes people of African heritage. So, ironically, it is a little bit. But basically, let's say those of us who were not born into a predominantly Buddhist culture have a chronic problem, and that is lack of faith. And part of this is a result of events in European and North and South American history. Some of it is to do with the long-term effect of the Protestant Reformation. It doesn't matter whether you grow up Protestant or not. If you grow up in America, you grow up Protestant. And our problems we have with hierarchy based upon again, I'll say the American War of Independence, the French Revolution, and other things. And yeah, some things like that. And then our scientific prejudices. And science can be a prejudice. Of course, it's nice to talk about religious prejudices. We have those too, God knows. But I know shit about science. I'm not a scientist. I don't know any science beyond not even up to grade school level. And yet, I think that I'm smarter than those from non-scientific societies. Deep down, I have that prejudice. I think, oh yeah. Well, they talk about that, but that couldn't be real. That couldn't be real. Science would just... I don't know shit. I have no right to say what could or couldn't be real. I'm an ignorant old fart. I can barely use a tablet. Who the hell am I to think that way? And yet, we do. And that harms our faith. And that's why I think it's very important for us to understand what mantra really is. I mean, of course, it's up to an individual whether they're going to buy into it or not. But one of the reasons why sometimes, people, especially in this country, may do a lot of practice and don't progress. I'm not saying that that's ubiquitous, but I'm saying if that were a situation, one of the reasons would be a lack of faith, lack of simple belief in the effectiveness of it. Because it's not like taking medicine. I mean, I guess there's a belief factor in that too, but it's like medication will work whether I know how it works or believe that it's going to work or not. But meditation won't. If you don't believe in it, your mind has the power to stop it from working. And I see that, if I may say so, in myself and frequently. And it's not that we need to be simple-minded or that we need to ignore our education. It's that we're so close-minded. We prejudge so much. I'm speaking of myself here because I can't see anybody else's mind. I have to live with my mind, so I know all about my attitudes and prejudices. We limit things so much that it's like, we are really like the monkey with its hand caught in a jar because it won't let go of whatever's in the jar. We just won't suspend our disbelief. And so we replace genuine magic, genuine sacredness, the genuine transcendence of human misery with fantasy. I mean, I don't mean this in a bad way, but why is it that the most popular type of movie now for adults are based on comic books about people with miraculous powers? Anyway, I go and see those movies too, but still, we should look at that. So when you recite the mantra of Guru Rinpoche or Yamantaka, or Vajrayogini, or Vajrakila, or Manjushri, or Tara, or Chenrezig, or Amitabha, whoever, you are bringing them into your body-mind. Not just their speech. You're not just blessing your speech with their speech. Of course you're doing that. But you are bringing them in. And that will work unless you keep on pushing them back out. So, Om Mani Padme Hum, I don't believe in you. Om Mani Padme Hum, you're just symbolic. Om Mani Padme Hum, I don't feel compassionate. Om Mani Padme Hum, I'd like to kill some people. That's not going to work. But that's what we do. Because the mantra is a thought, right? It's a thought that you're expressing, you know, and your mala going very fast, suspiciously fast. And, you know, and then, but it's interrupted by other thoughts. And those other thoughts are, you know, my butt hurts. Oh, my back hurts. I don't like this. I wonder what's for lunch. I hope it's not tofu again. You know, it's like, so we got to do better than that. Otherwise, we are wasting our time, and we're wasting what we've been given. Now, when we break down the word mantra, we do it by adding to it to clarify its meaning. And when they do that, they translate it as manas chaya. Manas is mind, like mens in Latin. Chaya means to protect. So it means the protection of mind. And we see this, for example, in the peaceful Manjushri section of our Yamantaka practice. It protects the mind from thought, and it protects you from the conceptual mind. So the idea of the use of mantra is you are replacing all of your discursive thought with the thought of mantra. Now, the generation stage, of course, is also a thought. So strictly speaking, at any moment that your mind is saying the mantra, it's not visualizing. It can oscillate back and forth very quickly, but it can't be at the same time. But when you verbally say the mantra while doing the visualization, it retains the continuity of coordinating both of them. So that is, I mean, of course, we use mantra in other ways, the emission and withdrawal of light rays to receive blessings and help others and so on. And these are important points and extensions of it. But basically, the fundamental role of mantra in the creation stage is to unite with the deity, to bring the deity into you or you into the deity. There is another type of mantra use, which is called Vajra repetition. And this is typically either the 3 syllables Om, Ah, Hum, or in some cases can be the deity's mantra coordinated with the breathing. In the generation stage, a Vajra repetition is used to create a state of tranquility based on using the breathing in the context of a deity meditation. In the completion stage, it's used to help bring your prana into the avaduti, the central channel, which is something that we will discuss tomorrow morning when we look at the completion stage. I'd like to turn to questions now, and if you run out of questions, I'm sure I'll find something to talk about. Yes? Oh, you need to wait for Mike.
On?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not a matter of semantics. It is a conceptualization. And I had reached a point where I thought the mantra was helping me uncover the deity within.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's bringing the deity into
Either way, there's actually no outside and inside.
or inside.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So because
Yeah.
I can get hooked in.
Well, we have to be careful, by which I mean I have to be careful saying this is for this and that is for that.
Okay.
Because nothing is ever just for one reason in this.
Okay. Because I'm thinking, for myself at least, thinking that the deity is still out there still means I'm not deity. But having the idea of like doing the mantra repetition that the adventitious stains are getting cleansed, and I will eventually realize.
Well, the deity is both out there and in there. The proof that you are the deity is that you can hear me and think and see and smell and taste. In other words, that you have a mind. If you pursue the reasoning of Mahayoga, you'll come to the conclusion that it would be impossible for mind to exist if it were not perfect. So it's simply a matter of, as you said, secondary or adventitious stains. But the deity is out there in the sense that there are Buddhas. And when you think of any of these deities as out there, as in front of you, or as an object of supplication, you are, because all of these deities are all Buddhas, because every Buddha is all Buddhas, because there's only one Dharmakaya. And therefore, so you're acknowledging and making use of the compassion and power and so on of all Buddhas. So it's fine.
It's not the second question I was going to ask, but it's making me think of a conceptualization that may, well, I guess they're all going to cause problems down the road. But I'm thinking of Buddhas, plural, out there, but there's only one Dharmakaya. Is it safe for now to think of it as like the nature of light, that light is like a unified feel, it's a oneness, unless you examine it, and then it looks like little photon bundles?
No, I wouldn't think of it in such physical terms. I think it's probably better. I mean, I've heard and read many slick answers to this question, but it's probably better to not conceptualize it at all. And just go on experience. Because when we try to conceptualize, as we all do, I do this all the time, things we have not yet experienced, we actually limit our potential temporarily to experience them.
Okay. And then the second question I was going to ask is, this sounds a little new agey, but whatever, the idea that depending on the sound that you're emitting, say Hui versus D, different frequencies, different decibels, it alters you inside, and that's all I'm going to say, because knowing so little about winds and whatever, is it stupid to say that you want to emit a certain sound to realize the compassion of Chenrezig versus like a clear slicing through wisdom of Manjushri?
I don't know. As I've said, I am scientifically challenged. So I don't know enough to say whether frequencies and decibels enter into it. I can't. In other words, I have no idea if they do or not.
Okay.
But certainly, I've seen an idea similar to what you said, which is that the mantras are the deity in the form of spoken and written sound.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure.
Thank you, Lama.
Yeah.
My question is along the lines of what you were just discussing. I have trouble with the word conceptualizing. I've also, thoughts come into my head of the deity is the book, the deity is the mantra, the deity is the text. So could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I'm just getting confused about, don't conceptualize it, and yet
Well, any idea is obviously made up of concepts. We should not demonize conceptualization. It's one of the tools that make us as human beings well able to practice Dharma if we so choose. But we need to be able to choose what we think and not have what we think impose itself on us. Now, I've talked a lot in previous weekends like this, subjecting people to my blather, that I have OCD, which I do, which means that I struggle even more, I would guess, than most people with being controlled, having my mood, and to some extent what I do, controlled by what I think. And so this is an issue. I mention that so that I make it clear that this is an issue that I'm very interested in. A lot of Buddhist meditation in general, including Vajrayana, but not even, we don't need to be that specific, is concerned with taking back your power from your thoughts. And there are many different strategies given for doing this. Probably the most complete presentation that I've seen is in the works of Lord Gyamtso and his successors and Dogpo Teshe Namdrel and so on. Different things that you do with thought at different points. But the habit of thinking certain ways becomes self-perpetuating. And again, that may have something to do with neuroplasticity, but I don't know. I just know the word. So if you get into another habit, a different habit, it will gradually accumulate a power and, so to speak, a life of its own. To give you an example of this, when we have a habit of getting angry, I was basically born angry, I'm told. I was told by those who were around. And I can remember being angry from before I could walk or talk or had teeth. I have very early memories, and I was mostly pretty angry. So I was an angry child. And at a certain point, I discovered when I was about 7 that I had a choice. Wasn't it because I had cognitively developed or anything? I just discovered this one day that I was able to watch myself becoming angry. And what I saw happen was that there was a moment where I had to make a choice. And the choice which I usually made to get angry was pretty much a conscious one, if you slow it down. But it was a conscious one made under the seduction of the lie of anger. And what I remember discovering is anger, the moment before you become angry, seduces you by telling you it's going to feel good. Let me in. but it never does. I have never been simultaneously happy and angry. I know I cannot be. Has anyone here ever actually felt happy while they were angry? See, I don't think it's possible. I'm not getting this just from the books. I like the books. The books are great. But when it comes down to stuff like this, you really want to feel it, right? So the thing that I noticed was that and then I became a shithead and just let myself get angry anyway. But I did experience this when I was 7. And it was the damnedest thing, because I realized, oh my God, we have all these choices. We think we're running on automatic, but we're not, you know. But the choices are made under circumstances of misinformation. Like when that pre-anger state says it's going to feel good, and it doesn't. It really never does. Aside from all the other messes that, you know, it causes. So one of the things about cutting through habits is slowing down your responses to your own desires, such as, I'd like to get angry and tell that person off. Slowing down your responses so that you can look to see, have I been making that choice, like the choice to get angry, while misinformed? Now that's all conceptual, but it's what the Buddha called tsujinyila jepa, correct mental engagement. Of course it's conceptual, but it's healthy, it's good, and it's freeing. Did that have anything to do with your question?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
good.
absolutely. That
Okay.
brought a lot of clarity, except my problem is anger also, but you know, there's other problems that correlate with your anger problem that I had an aha moment saying, yes, that's right.
Yeah. But there is another thing with anger specifically that I found helpful, and I forget, this was taught to me. I forget who first taught it. It might have been Trungpa Rinpoche. I can't remember. But it's about preparation. One of the things about habit is the momentum of planning. We talked about this, I think, during a previous weekend when Lama Trautup was teaching, how, you know, when you go to sleep at night thinking, I've got to wake up at 5 in the morning, you'll wake up before the alarm clock goes off because you'll have planned. Now, you haven't maintained the concept of I must get up at 5 in the morning throughout the night. If you do, you won't go to sleep. And that can happen too. But somehow, the momentum of that plan stays with you. The application of it is this. When you know you're going into a situation where in the past you have gotten angry, you can alert yourself to that and say, in the past, when I've been around these people, I've eventually lost my temper. I don't want to do it. I didn't like how it felt. I didn't like what it led to. I'm not going to do it again, or I'm going to try not to do it again. Now, it may not work the first time, but it may slow it down. It may take more to piss you off. And if you keep on reinforcing that, that will eventually be more powerful than the habit of anger itself. Because fundamentally, we want to feel good. We want to be happy. And once you bring to mind the experience that anger and happiness cannot coexist in the same consciousness at the same moment, you kind of lose interest in it. And then extreme circumstances. Well, you think you're doing fine, and then someone says that one thing that you weren't prepared for, and you lose it, and you bite their head off. You know, but at least, like when I've done this, when I've been dealing with certain circumstances that I periodically have to deal with, that I tend to get angry, I found that I can last out more days, or, you know, make it through an entire engagement and so on without getting angry, if I prepare myself that way.
Thank you, Lama. So I want to know if you have any advice for how to keep. I just love what you said about how we have this view of ourselves as being bad, or and we have a whole history, if we looked back, that limits us. And I can say that on an intellectual level, I absolutely agree with a sort of pure view. I can grasp that.
Sure.
Right? And in meditation, I can actually feel that.
Okay.
And but when I'm walking around, you know, I think, and you know, consciously I'll think, you know, I'll be on the subways and I try to practice.
Yeah.
But it's really hard. I mean, it's not,
Yes.
in meditation it's hard enough, but in that situation.
Yes.
And so is there any advice for how we might put ourselves into that in everyday life?
Yeah. Basically two things. One is, they're both hard, because this is the same, in one way or another, we all struggle with this problem. The one piece of advice is, if you can, and it's very, very hard, because you know, you have a very busy life, a lot of responsibilities. But if you can take time daily, and ideally if you can do some yearly retreat, even if it's only a few days or a week, to do intensive yidam practice, that will help. The intensive practice, but the thing is, for this to work, you have to have a deep karmic connection with that yidam. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been upfront about this. He said they're all the same from their point of view, but each one of us has certain karmic predispositions, and it will be much more effective. In my experience, it's the difference between all or nothing, frankly. And you have to both identify with and be in love with, and that sounds narcissistic, but I don't mean it that way, the yidam. And have no reservation about their effectiveness, appropriateness, where you received it, from whom you received it, how you were trained, everything. Everything has to be, you have to be 100% comfortable with it. Then, so that's the first thing, which is to do more yidam practice. The second thing is, and this is something that we can start, you know, right away with whatever, is to put more effort into post-meditation discipline. And this is a more direct answer to your specific question. Most of us find unceasing post-meditation very, very difficult. So, for example, when you arise from a session of deity practice, you clearly visualize yourself as the deity with the 3 syllables in the 3 places, and hopefully as much of the rest as you can. And you dedicate the merit, and you get up and, you know, you do whatever you have to do. Since whatever you have to do takes a lot longer than the amount of time you spent doing yidam practice, the sense of yourself as the deity is either immediately overwhelmed by responsibilities and busyness, or gradually thins out until it just kind of vanishes. It's unrealistic for us, given our lifestyles especially, to expect that expect a steady stream of post-meditation discipline, of the threefold bearing. So what you need to do, and this is something that any of us can do, is place reminders in our lives. Don't forget that for us as beginners on the path of accumulation, meditation is primarily a matter of learning to return as soon as possible from a state of distraction. It is not yet remaining in a state of undistracted river-like samadhi. Well, that's going to be all the more true in post-meditation. But there are times and circumstances under which you can be reminded. Now, that's very, very individual, very, very personal. I mean, what you do, the things that will cause you to remember, oh yeah, I'm Vajrayogini, or oh yeah, I'm Hayagriva, or whoever it is. You know, because you want to be able to do it discreetly. I mean, especially where you work. But it's possible, you know. In controlled environments, it doesn't have to be discreet. I mean, there were great meditation masters of Eastern Tibet who used to lead people doing Mahamudra and Dzogchen practice in valleys. And one of them used to get out, I think it was, I forget his name. I can't remember anybody's name anymore. And he would just shout, Ma Ying, Ma Ying, and it would echo through the valley, which means don't be distracted, don't be distracted. And people can actually do that. Like sometimes lamas, you know, great lamas will do calligraphies of things that say, you know, Rikpa, awareness, or Maying, be undistracted, and things like that. And you can have those things around your home to remind you. The New York City subway requires more effort. But you can be open-minded. There was a great Lama of the Sakya tradition named Terchen Rinpoche, who he lived in Harlem for many years in the 70s and early 80s. And I mean, he's an extraordinary person. I won't begin to just try to tell you stories about him, but he told close friends of his, Kala Rinpoche and other teachers of his ilk, that he had seen enlightened Viras and Dakinis on the New York subway. I mean, where else are they going to go? It's New York. What, you think they're going to be in Chicago? And so that's there, you know. So it's kind of like be open-mindedness. That open-mindedness will help. Yeah.
Thank you again. So, Yeshe, you pointed out, like for Ilya and for the rest of us, obviously, having obstacles that make it somewhat harder to maintain that post-meditative state. And I've heard somewhat different explanations. I'm going to try to circle around here. The saying that the Vajrayana was created for these dark times.
Mm-hmm.
And then yet here we go, and it's like, boom, we leave our house, and boom, in your face, news, anger, everything that we know that's out there. Can you share with us how we can skillfully apply? How is it that the Vajrayana is ideally suited? Is it because our shit is getting constantly churned up and the Vajrayana can help us deal with this grist for the mill?
I'm going to divide your question into three aspects because I think I see at least three elements in it.
Okay.
And two of them I can answer without it just being my opinion. So the third, it will involve my opinion. So I'll try to keep that one separate. The first concept that you bring up, which is a very important one, is obstacle. Actually, what we call obstacle is the substance of the path of spiritual development. I first began to suspect this when Bardor Rinpoche used to give the refuge vow back in the old days. And when talking about the Buddha, he would always define the Buddha as possessing fourfold fearlessness. Freedom from fear in proclaiming that he has abandoned all that is to be abandoned. Freedom from fear in proclaiming that he has realized all that is to be realized. Freedom from fear in proclaiming the path and the obstacles overcome on the path. And I thought, why is he mentioning, because this is clearly a traditional thing, I think, based on the original, the oldest or most fundamental Buddhist teachings from which Rinpoche was quoting. And I was like, why would they use the word obstacle in this context? And I realized that what he was saying was that obstacles are what we are overcoming, and that is the path. The only difference between obstacles and the path is the path are the means by which we travel that journey. So it's like, for example, the path is a vehicle and the obstacles are the road we're driving on. Now, if you're driving back to Albany from here, I don't know if you take the Taconic or if you cross the river and you take 87, but you don't view the Taconic or 87 as an obstacle. It's the way home. But that's what we have a tendency to call obstacles. And Lama Trotop said this to me one day. He said, now we've infected them. I said, well, what? He said, all these Western students now talk about obstacles all the time. They never talked about obstacles. He said, we've given them that idea. We're obsessed with obstacles. This is an obstacle, that's an obstacle, and so on. Sister Rinpoche says that the things we call obstacles are really challenges, and we grow by meeting them. That's actually what the path does. So the first thing I want to say is that there are no obstacles other than the path itself. The only obstacle is if we abandon the path. But actually, for example, a person who makes you angry is not an obstacle. They're a resource on the path, because you can't exercise patience. You can't practice patience without someone pissing you off. There has to be something to resist. It's like if you lift weights to gain muscle strength, the weights are not obstacles to your physical development. They help you. It's the same thing. You need a counteractive force. Okay. Now, the second thing hold on, let me finish. The second thing was the notion about Vajrayana being especially effective in times of degeneracy. Now, Lama Trotop and Bardor Rinpoche both say that frequently, and I think it's a statement that is based on quotations from Guru Rinpoche's predictions in the various termas. But we need to be clear about what that does and does not mean. It means that even though we have some problems, some additional problems, if we practice with great diligence, we can still achieve the same result that was achieved in past ages. It does not mean that because we live in difficult times, we don't have to practice, or we have to practice less. actually, we who quote that a lot in our tradition are often criticized by the teachers of other traditions for doing so, because they say it's just kind of empty words. It's not empty words. I mean, these things mean something, but we need to be clear that now, if you're talking specifically about Guru Rinpoche's blessing being greater in future times, that's a different thing. That is also true, but that is because of his aspirations. Like, for example, the reason why it's easier to be reborn in Sukhavati than in Abhirati or the other pure realms is because of Amitabha's aspiration. Similarly, it is easier to, we believe, I mean, this is a sectarian statement, but I'm unapologetically sectarian. We believe it is easier to achieve awakening in this time through Guru Rinpoche's teachings than through those of others. I believe that. You know, I can say it here. There are places where, as we know, I can't say that. But that is a sectarian view. I am the sectarian, yes. I believe that Guru Rinpoche's teachings are better. I just do. I don't apologize to anybody. And, but again, that's because of his aspirations. So I guess it's like saying that Sukhavati is a better pure realm because it's easier to get to. But that depends upon karmic connection. In the original treasure of the embodiment of the three jewels, which is a treasure discovered in the 17th century by Terchen Barway Dorje, Guru Rinpoche says, anyone who is sincerely interested in practicing my teachings is somebody who met me and has a connection with me. And therefore, when they practice them, that will ripen and they will achieve Buddhahood in one life. That Guru Rinpoche made that promise. And we see this. I mean, you'll see two people who are equally involved with Vajrayana Buddhism, but one person will look at Guru Rinpoche and have no interest whatsoever. None. I mean, just goes right, could be anybody, could be Mickey Mouse, they don't care. And another person feels very strongly the other way around. That's because the one person has no karmic connection with him, and the other person does. And I mention this simply because part of it is the karmic connection. You know, if you have a karmic connection with another tradition, that's what you should practice. So those things, those are not my opinion. I mean, I expose my sectarianism, but yeah, so what? Now, my opinion. I don't believe in good and bad times. Obviously, from the year 1950 until, I would say, well into the 90s, were really bad times in Tibet. Obviously, the 1980s were, for the most part, really bad time for the music industry in this country. No, I'm just saying. Anyway, yeah, that's just old people stuff, you know, I guess. Yeah. Locally, of course, there are bad times. I mean, this is not a good time to be in Nebraska. This is not a good time to be in, Mozambique, you know. But I don't believe in the notion that what you find in several religions, including Buddhism, that things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Certainly climate change, yes. But to say that our human lifespan is getting less, that's just not true. It's not true. We live longer than we used to. And to say that, you know, and the reason why I think this is an issue is people are constantly thinking about transitory situations, you know, like if they don't like the current presidential administration, they'll say, well, we live in terrible, terrible times. You know, I have members of my family who excoriated the previous president And I know people who excoriate the current president. And for both of these people, they identified the period of 8 or 4 years, whatever it is, as bad times. Well, from their point of view, it was. But there's never been a good time. There's never been a time in human history when we did not murder each other, torture each other, berate each other, insult one another, steal one another's property, kill one another's children. There's never been a time when everybody had what they needed. There's never been a time when the wealthy shared their wealth with the poor. There's never been a time. There's been no golden age. We have to stop dreaming. You know. Now, what the Buddha, I think, was talking about, and I'm basing this on a statement by the current Kala Rinpoche, is that what he was talking about with the notion of degeneration was a kind of taking for granted that happens with our tradition. So that, for example, you know, if we met the Buddha, it would have been a big deal. You wouldn't probably, for most people who met him, most people probably didn't think, I wonder if this guy's any good or not. Probably most people would have been impressed. But because we didn't meet him, you know, yeah, he sounds good, but so the other one, you know, the guy who died like that, the one who went like that, and, you know, it's like, you know, all this kind of stuff. So we kind of take things for granted because of the amount of time that has passed. You know, or you hear stories of Milarepa and you think, well, I couldn't do that. No, we won't do it. It's not that we can't do it. We won't do it. The only thing worse about our time than his time is we have options. In his time, you know, he had very few options. So, you know, that's something. But the fact that we have options means that we are required to make more mature choices. We have to choose to turn our iPhones off once in a while. We have to choose not to look at every single post on Facebook. We have to choose not to, this is a real problem for me, not to play solitaire. I find it very, very soothing. And that can take a while, you know, because I'm really... we have to choose these things. We have to make these choices. But we can. There's nothing preventing us from doing that. There is nothing preventing anyone from living their life the way they want to within what is possible, given their means and the society that they live in. But for most people, we have quite a few choices we can make. Now, did that have anything to do with your question?
Oh, you just went off on a different track than I thought you would, but that actually caused illumination. What I had been thinking would be that you would address the sacred view, because in a way that cuts through, based on Rinpoche's, some of his previous teachings. I've really wholeheartedly have been trying my best, given the current situation, to have that equanimity and not let myself off the hook and have the ones I love most dearest here and do Tong Len for the ones that I have to even say previously thought were complete shitheads and waste of a human life. And it's like you don't get off this cushion if you're going to leave it in the same way. And if that is the key to the Vajrayana, that there are so many more of us and so many great people, but also so many people doing harm, and it's like, wait, that's dualistic. We're all Buddhas. And there's as much innate goodness in the ones you call shitheads as in the ones you think are good. And that's where I thought you were going to go. But
yeah, well, there's that too, definitely.
Okay.
But it's you have to in post-meditation we have to make ethical decisions. And ethical decisions obviously require judgment, but it's judgment of ourselves, not judgment of others. There is a saying about this. It's a Mahayana saying, more than a specifically Vajrayana saying, but I find it very, very much dovetails with the notion of sacred outlook. There are two things in the world that are none of your business: your own virtues and others' faults. Everything else is your business. But those two things are never your business. What's good about you and what's bad about, or you think is bad about others. But at the same time, you need to, protect yourself. I mean, Kalaro Rinpoche used to say this. He used to say, you never know who is a Buddha and who is a thief. So have devotion and respect for everyone, and keep your door locked. You have to be prepared for the worst, but you should also leave room for the best. I'm very pessimistic. I experienced things in my first 10 years that caused me, and saw things that caused me to become rather pessimistic. But I've found myself more often surprised as a pessimist by how good people are and how many good people there are than I am by how bad people are or how many supposedly bad people there are. We also have to remember that you don't sell newspapers, let alone 24-hour news media, with good news. The days of people wanting to open up the paper and read about a fireman pulling a cat down from a tree are long gone. Unless he threw the cat into the fire or something. People don't want good news. Actually,
That's
there
what
is
they
now.
want on Facebook.
Yeah, well,
because
there's. I get a New York Times bulletin every morning, and the very, very bottom. It's the CBC one, because I get ones from Canada too. At the very, very bottom, they have the good news section, saying now it's the last thing you see in the morning bulletin. Some good news. It's very short because not much, but.
I just want to say that some of you know that I'm a physician. I work at Rikers Island Correctional Facility. I have to say that it's an incredibly challenging place to work, but I have never, I feel very blessed in a way, because it has shown me really the good in people. I mean, people have done horrible things, but it is miraculous the variety of human beings that exist, and the goodness that is in, I may not connect with everybody, but it is surprising how little it takes to find that goodness in other people. And so for that reason, I feel like I am absolutely blessed to work there, because I've been shown that. I don't have to make it up. It's not intellectual.
No.
It's real.
Yeah. Well, you made me think of something that His Holiness the 17th Karmapa said in 2011. And it was when he was teaching at KTD in a tent, and I was all messed up. I'd forgotten translating it, forgotten what he said, but fortunately Claire, my daughter, remembered it, because it was something that at her age, at 9, which she could use practically. And what His Holiness said was, when you think you're angry at someone, and this judgment is just a kind of anger. It's all rejection. I mean, it's all hatred. We have nice words for this. I'm not angry, I'm upset. Or I'm not angry, I'm irritated. Or I'm not angry, I'm just surprised. Or, those are all just lies. But when we think we're angry at someone, we're actually not angry at the person. We're angry at something they did. They did or said, which is just another form of did. And it sounds so obvious that it wouldn't help, but as Claire pointed out to me, if you apply that in a situation, you realize that the person, while they did perform the action, is not the action. When we fail to make that distinction, then we stereotype the person by the action. You know, and it's so-and-so who, I don't know, likes ketchup. I hate ketchup. So if I think of someone as a ketchup liker, person likes ketchup. You know. So you have to make these fine distinctions. Shantideva talks about this in the 8th chapter of the Bodhicharyavatara. Shantideva has this magnificent ability, characteristic of the Prasangika Madhyamaka school, of making hilariously funny arguments. We don't normally think of middle way school as entertaining, but logic, anyway, you'll see. Shantideva proposes a situation where a man comes up to us, or any one of us, and hits us on the head with a stick. Our response, based on habit, is to get angry. At whom are we angry? We're angry at the man. Well, Shantideva says, but the man didn't touch you. It was the stick. I mean, I almost want to do it in like a Monty Python kind of voice. But that's, 50th anniversary last year, Monty Python. They're all on Netflix now, by the way. No, I'm going to lose it if I start hearing those voices in my head. Okay, so I'm hearing John Cleese. Okay. So it was what hurt you physically? Shantideva asks, and you say, well, it was the stick. I said, well, why aren't you angry at the stick? And you say, because it's an inanimate object without volition, not in control of its action. So Shantideva says, okay. So your argument is you should not be angry at the stick because it was not in control. Although it hit you, it did so beyond its control. So you should be angry at the man. And you say, the reader says yes. He says, but the man wasn't in control. He was controlled by his anger. I agree with you that you shouldn't be angry at the stick because it was not the real cause. But neither was the man. It was the man's anger. You know. And then he goes on and on, talks about looking at self-fixation and so on. But the point is that people are just middlemen between their conditioning and their actions. And it is not, I mean, I'm not advocating denial of moral or ethical responsibility for our actions, but it doesn't make sense to get angry at a person. We do it because we're used to doing it. You know, and that's the only reason. We've been doing it forever. But there's nothing right about it. It's not natural. You know, we're like people, I mean, these things occur to me because of my OCD. We're like people who for thousands of years have scratched our right ear by going like this. We can't go like this. No, we have to go like that. If I want to scratch my left ear, I have to go like that. Or I can do it like that, you know. But I can't just go like this or like that. It's unnatural to me. Well, which is more unnatural? Obviously, that's more unnatural, but if you do something that way often enough, you know, it becomes pseudo-natural.
Thanks, Jesse. When discussing meditation, we learn mind training, and in a sense, we learn to control our anger. I recently dealt with somebody who liked to pick on Buddhists who weren't going to get angry. So he's a great teacher. I could do a bit, speaking of Monty Python. But the thing is if we're patient individuals, there's, I remember Alatala land.
What's that?
Didn't Bardor used to talk about Alatala? It's maybe my pronunciation. It was kind of La La Land in Tibetan.
Oh, you're quoting a song. Oh, Lu Alatala. Yeah. It's a saying is when you're about to ride over a cliff, you cry Guru Ujin Pema. But when you're riding on a smooth plain, you sing Lu means song. You just sing Alatala. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I didn't get the reference.
It's my pronunciation.
No, you pronounced Alatala correctly. And Rinpoche did indeed used to say that, but he hasn't said it for about 20 years, which means that...
I'm old school. Okay, so the issue becomes when we're adept at controlling our mind, the concept of self, will, I know there's no self, but inevitably there were lamas that were so blissed out in Tibet they didn't leave. And they endured the travail, burning monasteries, whatever. And there were other lamas that had the inclination to leave a bad situation. There's a part of us that has self-will. I know there's no self. The issue is if we're using visualization, mantra, whatever, to invite the divine into our being, how do we control our orientation to preserve the spiritual entity known as ourselves?
I think that's a good question. If I understand it, I think I see two elements to it. First of all, with regard to the choice that practitioners, yogis and yoginis made either to stay or leave during the initial occupation and subsequently during the Cultural Revolution or before the Cultural Revolution started in Tibet, I think that there are several things that happened. Many great masters, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Jangom Karmapa, His Holiness Sakya Trijin, His Holiness Benling Trichen, His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, His Holiness Jinze Rinpoche, and there's lots of holinesses. Anyway, they chose to leave because they realized that they would be unable to fulfill their duties in Tibet during the 1960s. They would have been killed. They would have, if not killed, put in prison. They would not have been allowed to teach. There were others. There are some siddhas of whom Lama Tratop has spoken during his teachings, who chose to remain in retreat. And they did so in most cases because they no longer needed human food. And because they were not, they had no high position or name or rank, because they did not need to be fed by people who were, by that point, starting to starve themselves. They didn't need to leave. And they helped people. They did their job, so to speak, by serving as examples of truly superhuman endurance and attainment. There's somebody just, yeah, I just read about it. There's many of them in Eastern Tibet. And then the third situation is the most unfortunate. It's those who would have left had they been able to, but were captured, arrested, and executed. And by that I would include the previous Gyamtso Rinpoche of Terchen Monastery, Gyamtso Pema Trime, who was Trungpa Rinpoche's root guru, and others who died under circumstances of, as you put it, travail. But this brings up, and I guess this is where you were heading, the more general question of when does the need for self-preservation trump a sacred outlook or pure appearances and seeing the equality of all things? And this is a very important question because it goes to a larger question that will probably keep me ranting on for almost half an hour. No, I'll try and be quick. The larger question is, we practice a tradition that involves three types of discipline at once. The discipline of abstention from all that is directly or indirectly harmful to others. That's the discipline of the individual liberation. And it goes very much to the fundamental meaning of Dharma, which, as His Holiness the 17th Karmapa says frequently, is ahimsa, harmlessness, nonviolence. We also practice a second discipline, which is the discipline of doing everything we can to help others, directly and indirectly. That's the discipline of the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva vow. And finally, we practice a third discipline, the Vajrayana, to see everything and everyone as divine, as pure, as equal, and so on. So, in fact, we not only have one possible contradiction, we have two. What takes precedence in a specific situation? Fortunately, this question has come up before, and so there are traditional answers for whatever they're worth. The traditional answers are available. The basic answer is emphasize that which is of the greatest importance in the specific situation. So, for example, if you are a monk or nun, and you are forbidden by vow from having liquor, and you're receiving an empowerment, and there's a little bit of liquor in that's put in your hand, you drink it. You would not drink a bottle of it, but you drink that little spoon. And that does contravene your pratimoksha vow, because in the pratimoksha it says not even as much as would stay on the tip of a blade of grass. If you are practicing the bodhisattva vow and you have to lie to save lives, you would do it. Even though you know you will accumulate negative karma by breaking your vow. You will, and you have to be willing to accept that. You know, if I see it's some guy coming along saying, "Have you seen so and so? I want to kill him." I'm going to lie. And you also have the right to protect your own life. If we deny the validity of that right, then we would have to say that we're not allowed to eat or breathe. Because every time you breathe in, you are killing. Every time you eat, no matter what you eat. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't matter whether you're vegetarian or not. Obviously, if you eat meat, there's additional killing. I eat meat. But even if you eat stuff that just falls off a tree, somehow, somewhere, either there's beings living in it, or it's a sentient being, because I'm not convinced the whole plants aren't sentient being thing. I don't buy that. And then, that's my opinion. I can't say that on the, okay, I'll just say it away from the what's the thing? I think plants are sentient beings. Okay, all right, yeah. It's not official Buddhist opinion. Okay, or because you eat it, somebody else doesn't get to and dies. That's just bottom line. So, Ananda at one point became so concerned about this, the Buddha's cousin, about the ethical issue of even ensuring his survival by eating, that the Buddha had to talk to him. He said, Ananda, eat. Ananda, for the sake of your practice of Dharma, eat. And, so I think that's the best kind of answer. But obviously, any ethical choice it must be in some way specific to the situation. If we refuse to admit that, then, and I know there are people who do, ethical realists and others who would argue against that, but I think it becomes untenable. Oh, that wasn't a long rant. Any other questions? You got one. Yeah, I saw that.
Thank you very much for the
You're
teachings.
welcome.
So I was just wondering specifically, say if we get to the point where we're able to visualize ourselves as the deity or like as our yidam, aside from trying to hold the image of ourselves as the deity, even if it's just visualization, what other things are we supposed to do?
Oh, okay. Well, the next step is, well, there are two steps. During the day, the next step is to learn to synchronize recognition of yourself as the deity with recognition of your mind's nature. So initially practice those in flashes, in alternation, and then try to unify them. That's the daytime thing. Then the nighttime thing is, the first thing is get stable in lucid dreaming. And once you've stabilized lucid dreaming and you can set yourself easy tasks in dreams and do them, then it's time to change yourself into the deity in the dream and work on that. That's the next thing. Yes?
You said that really fast.
Oh, okay. The daytime practice is to learn to synchronize or bring together recognition of your mind's nature with recognition of your mind as the deity, of you as the deity. And the nighttime practice is to stabilize, first gain the ability and then stabilize lucid dreaming and then start turning into the deity. Now, as we discussed, maybe it was last weekend with Lama Tratap, I can't remember, at the beginning or something, it really depends upon the level of sleep, when lucidity works for you, in other words, the deeper the sleep is, the easier it will be for you to actually become the deity, but the harder it is to gain lucidity. If you gain lucidity in very, very light sleep, it's almost at that level where it's hypnagogic, so it's in between thoughts and images, And then when I try that, it's no more than just visualizing during the day. It's not very effective. So you gradually, I think, need to, and I'm not good at this, but I think you gradually need to deepen the, there's a whole bandwidth, I guess, of dream sleep. You want to try and deepen the level of sleep at which you can gain lucidity in dreams.
Second, just follow-up question. The daytime practice being learning to synchronize the recognition of your mind's nature with the recognition of your mind's nature as the deity. Is there
Recognition of your mind as the deity. In other words, Jongul Drtai talks a lot about this in his commentaries on the embodiment of the three jewels. Basically, when you have a visualization of yourself as, let's say, Guru Rinpoche, then you have to look at that and say, okay, where is that really? Now you're identifying, the hat's up here and you're identifying your body, but it's not actually your body, it's your mind. Well, where is that? You know, and does the image of the deity exist apart from your mind? Therefore, is not the image of the deity of the same nature as your mind? These are the things you need to analyze. Let Pema, and then you didn't see her, that's what you, so Pema and then Lama Colleen. Or as Khenpo Tsotrum used to say, 1, 2.
Bajra Pride.
Yes.
So is this related to your earlier comment about you really need to believe it?
Yes, very good question. The true source of the pride of being the deity is that the recognition that your Buddha nature really is the deity. If it's anything else, it's just your ego, you know. And the way to tell the difference is very simple. It's so simple and easy and common sense. If you have the sense, I'm the deity, and you're not, that's not the good pride, because it's comparative. If you have the sense, I'm the deity, everyone must be the deity, you're on the right track. Because the difference between, we use the word pride in English in a pejorative and in a positive way. And the difference between these two is actually very simple. Healthy pride, including this type of Vajrayana pride, is not comparative. It's not, I'm better than you, or I'm better than them. It's, I'm good. The klesha of pride is always comparative. I'm better than so-and-so. That's also the difference between jealousy and the wisdom of accomplishment. Jealousy is comparative. They've got more than me. I don't want them to have that.
Where's number 2?
Oh, Colleen, sorry, I forgot.
Well, this is not a lengthy question. I was listening to a portion of your presentation on this topic that you gave in Seattle.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I was really interested in, I forget whether it was in connection with the generation stage or the completion stage, that you shared Mingyur Rinpoche's threefold classification of student types in terms of body, speech, and mind.
Type, yeah.
And I found that very extremely helpful personally, because I understood why I didn't understand some kinds of presentations. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to ask you to share some of that again.
Well, I don't remember it much beyond that. He did it here. It was here. Were you there?
I don't think so.
Well, then I'm sure you could get a tape of it or something.
Right.
Yeah, but it was here that when he was last here that he did that. Okay. That was a wonderful teaching that he gave that night. I hope that we've preserved it. Yeah, I don't remember what. Yeah, I don't remember what. That must have been in a generic context. that I said it.
I think that what I remember of the reason that you presented that was to explain why different people need to practice with different kinds of emphases.
Yeah.
Like some people are more visual, so
Yeah.
the details, the visual part of imagining the self as the deity was perhaps paramount for people
Yeah.
of that type.
Yeah.
For others, it would be maybe the speech or breath or kind of wind aspect, and for others, it was, you called it just the kind of, the mind type was just the kind of hanging out, or something like that. At any rate, it was an interesting, yeah, okay.
Well, but I'd like to hear again what Mentor Rinpoche
Yeah, okay.
said about it. Time for one more good one. Yep.
So generation stage practice should be completed and perfected before you move on to completion stage practice.
Not necessarily.
Ideally in the...
Well, there are different opinions about that. Let me quote from one of my favorite books. It's a very short essay by Karma Khenchen Rinchen Tarje on practice of the Choling Tersar, so it's quite apt to quote from. It's a very terse little piece, so it won't take very long. And I quote, "Because the generation stage is fabricated, that is to say, is the generation or imagination of something by means of thought, it is a fabricated yoga. Therefore, in this Tersar tradition, the Choling Tersar, Bardor Tersar, Dujum Tersar, they're all collectively called Tersar because of the period. In this Tersar tradition, we consider the completion stage more empowerment and do not place that much emphasis on the generation stage per se. Therefore, when the generation stage is presented in this tradition, we present it as inseparable from the completion stage, like, for example, a flower and its fragrance." Now, he's getting that flower and fragrance, that's a quotation or a reference to the Hivajra Tantra, from which he's about to quote. The thing to understand is that, let's let the Buddha say it. From the two examinations, the Hivajra Tantra, like the fragrance dwelling in a flower, it cannot be smelt or sensed if the flower is absent. And therefore, great bliss will not be achieved or realized in the absence of form. So what he's saying here is that actually the completion stage is the realization that comes through the generation stage, that they're inseparable. But now we get on to the business about sequence. And that goes to very much to the question that Jimmy asked. Therefore, in practicing the generation stage, we must not do so in a partial way, emphasizing only the aspect of appearance or only the aspect of emptiness. It must be practiced as the unity of generation and completion. Because the generation stage is the means of accomplishing a unity. Now, he's referring to the fifth of the five completion stages, which we'll talk about tomorrow. And the completion stage is the wisdom or knowledge which allows that accomplishment. Therefore, they need to be practiced as a unity. One way to do this is for beginners to principally practice the generation stage. Then, as the master Sauroruha and Mitsuptawa Ajita Chandra wrote, in the first half of the session, practice the generation stage. In the second half of the session, practice the completion stage. And then, finally, so that's for an intermediate practitioner, then finally, cultivate the practice of generation and completion as a unity. Now, in Naropa's teachings, he specifically talks about this, and he says that there should be a little bit of completion stage practice. I need them on now. I get all mixed up. It's these bifocals. There's a joke there, a reference to a joke that I won't go so far as to tell the joke at the moment. You know the joke. Anyway. Oh, well, I will at some point. But so maybe after we dedicate the merit. Because it's a good joke, but there's no merit in it. Anyway, so in Naropa's instruction was that even in the practice of the generation stage, the practice of the associated completion stage should be present. So in evidence of this, for example, in the Chakra Samvara sadhana done by the Karma Kaju and also the Drikung Kaju, you do practice a little tumo, or chandali, before getting to the mantra repetition. And in the practice of Hevajra coming from Naropa, in both the daily practice and the full sadhana, you practice the Hevajra style of tumo in every session also. So there is the notion that you should, in the beginning, principally practice the generation stage until you gain stability, but not perfection. Then practice them equally. And then as your completion stage experience grows, then you can do less of the generation stage. But most lamas, from what I've seen, never stop practicing the generation stage, even though they've achieved, in some cases, presumably full awakening. I know that the 16th Karmapa did generation stage practices throughout his life. I know Bardor Rinpoche does. I know Lama Trotop does. And, many other teachers do. I mean, I'm cheeky, so I actually ask them, what do you chant every day? So I know what a lot of them chant, but I can't. It would be wrong of me to just tell you. So they do, but they do. And in some cases, they chant incredible amounts. One of Lama Trotop's teacher, Khenpo Achu, was a lineage holder both of the glorious Sakya tradition and of two Nyingma traditions at least, the Longchen Nyingtig and the Termas of Longsan Nyingpo. And he had 2 volumes that he chanted every day. A volume of the Lamdre practices from the Sakya tradition and a volume of the practices from the Terma tradition. Now this is considered to have been the greatest Dzogchen master of the late 20th and very early 21st century. He had an apparent on the tip of his nose, which indicates that he was the most recent incarnation of Vimalamitra. Vimalamitra sends every 100 years an incarnation to Tibet to protect the teachings of heart essence, of the great perfection, from intellectualization. And he was that one. And he achieved a rainbow body when he passed away. So if there's anybody who didn't need to chant, it was him, and yet he did. So I infer from that from examples like him and the previous Dungpo Chense Rinpoche, who also did a great deal of liturgical practice, that there are reasons to keep on doing it.
We had a question come up at lunch that comes out of what you just said.
Okay.
I know it's late, but can we ask
No, it's not late.
So, incarnation versus emanation.
I think these are English choice words. Well, the trulpa, emanation is the word trulpa, nirmana. And a trulpe ku, nirmana kaya, is an emanation body. Strictly speaking, the emanation body of a Buddha. And incarnation is an English word that does not correspond to any specific Tibetan word. Frequently, translators will say, no, we should use the word rebirth, not incarnation, because incarnation implies some kind of soul or spirit to incarnate and so on and so forth. And originally the term incarnation referred to the birth of Christ. It was a Christian term. But aside from the difference in words, there is sometimes a distinction made between someone's rebirth and their emanation. But sometimes the distinction is not made. When the distinction is made, they will say that the basis of emanation continues to dwell in a pure realm somewhere, but there are countless emanations. So, for example, they say that about several historical figures that, well, he went to this realm of Chakrasamvara, but dispatched emanations here. He went to Sukhavati, but dispatched emanations here, and so on. And other times they will not make that distinction. Now, whether the difference between making and not making the distinction is based on the aim of the writer or speaker, or actually refers to some ontological difference in the two phenomena, I don't know, because this is all, obviously I'm basing this on what I've heard, what I've been told. There are two main models or images given for how this works. You're talking about enlightened beings, right? And I've heard authoritative sources, great teachers, use both of them. So I don't feel that I know that one of them is more accurate than the other. One model is that when an enlightened person passes away, they basically become the Dharmakaya, and then they take the form of a Sambhogakaya, and from that they emit emanations. Another model is that the teacher becomes the Dharmakaya, emerges as the Sambhogakaya, and they themselves are all their emanations. So in one case, the way they put it makes it sound as though there's more difference between the emanation and the source of emanation. And the other way makes no distinction. Just a slight shift in how they put it. So obviously I have no idea. I think that these things we'll know when we get there. Kala Rinpoche once was talking about, he was teaching the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, and he gave us the reading transmission for the whole book, and then for another similar book by Taranatha. And then he said, if you want to, these are very good to study because especially they explain all the stages of the path. He said, but the thing about learning about the stages of the path is you don't need to, because you'll know when you get there. And he said, knowing about it is not going to help you get there. Now, that's different from what Lama Trotop is teaching, which explains the techniques by which one traverses the path. Whereas the stages of the path, say, a first level bodhisattva will be like this, and a second level bodhisattva like that. It's like, when you can produce 100 emanations and shake 100 Buddha realms, you'll know it. I'm sure you'll notice it. I mean, how would you, and then when it changes to 10,000 and then 1,000,000, and I'm sure these things are measurable. Anything else? All right, let's conclude with the full dedication, starting on page 7, please. Sunam diye tamje zikba nye tomne nyebe danam pamje ne chega nache balab chungbai sibe tsole drowa sho gewa diye chewo kun sunam yeshe tsozot sunam yeshe lejongwe damba kunye toba sho Gyamtso semne rinpoche mache panam chejo chik cheba nyamba mepa da Gonda Pelwar Show Semchen Tamche Dedan Denjorche Ngendro Tamche Takdu Tomba Show Emba Ganda Sajupa Deda Kunje Malam Droba Jo Sanje Rinje Zojen Dampengar Jangon Do Shal Do Lingbaya Samje Me Jon Rebu Sangwaju Sije Jon Da Jambe Da. Thank you all, and see you tomorrow morning. Turn off the webcast and I'll tell it. That's not appropriate, because you never know who's going to be offended by what. Well, then we know, I'm sure everybody who listened to that webcast is somebody that we know, so then we can, one of us, whoever knows them, will